Hi, I'm Tim and welcome to WatchYouWant.com. Thanks for logging on. Today we're looking at a watch that, depending on your perspective, actually embodies either the all-time highs or the most controversial periods of the Zenith manufacture. Now you're looking at the Chronomaster Open Power Reserve, 40 millimeters. This is the famed El Primero movement with a power reserve, and when I alluded to the controversy, I'm alluding to that open dial. Now that was the signature of former Zenith CEO, President, and Styling Director, yes, he wore all those hats, Thierry Nataf, possibly the most infamous man in the history of the luxury watch industry. You would think that in a hobby that essentially centers around luxuries and pastimes, people wouldn't be able to get too emotional about these things. After all, it's not a matter of life and death. But when the topic turns to Thierry Nataf in certain quarters on certain internet forums, I swear you're on the verge of a shooting war. Now, he was a very smart man, came from the LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy wine segment. So he came from outside the watchmaking industry, and he came to Zenith in 2000, 2001, and he immediately changed almost everything about that ancient manufacture, which dated back to 1865. Once known as kind of a frumpy supplier of movements first and a manufacturer of watches second, they went from frumpy to avant-garde in about 3 years. And when they went avant-garde, they went all the way avant. And they did so starting with the 2003 open dial that you see here. Now the Chronomaster line was the flagship of Zenith starting in the 1990s. And the case shape that you see here and the case size, the 40 millimeters, actually comes from that era. The triple stepped bezel, the fluted lugs, the dial design, all of that was inherited by Nataf. His innovation was this open escapement that you see right here. And he developed a special variant of the El Primero called the caliber 421 that actually reduced the amount of material in and around the bridges supporting the escapement of the El Primero so that you could actually see from the front of the watch just as easily as you could see the escapement from the back. In fact, there's actually better vista from the front than from the back. And although at the time it was hugely controversial, for all that Nataf got wrong while at the helm of Zenith, this is something he got absolutely right, because everyone has copped this look. And if you're familiar with the Audemars Piguet Millenary 4101, the model that arguably took the Millenary from sideshow to prime time and made it a superstar model and a waitlist item at Audemars Piguet boutiques, they took this open escapement idea and they ran with it. Thierry Nataf might be one of the most influential men in the watch industry, and he hasn't held a position of prominence at a major watchmaker since 2009. This open escapement is his enduring legacy, and it's easy to see why. First of all, the El Primero is a glorious looking movement. Second of all, if you start to pare down the bridges and expose more of that 5 Hertz, 36,000 vibration per hour escapement, you can see just how gorgeous and different it really is. It really opens up the heart of the watch for the casual connoisseur to appreciate alongside your own wrist. So you can start conversations with this. You can get friends to basically internalize what you find so appealing about a watch without having to waste language or explain at length. You just show it to them and they get it. It's beautiful, it's compelling, it's emotional. It's really at the root of what makes luxury watches and the watch collecting hobby so cool and so enjoyable. And again, you can do it without verbalizing anything. And it also gives you a lot of the appeal of a tourbillon. I think the best way to describe the open escapement, especially this one, which is so well done, is that it gives you maybe 90% of the enjoyment of a tourbillon for 10% of the price. The effect of seeing the heartbeat of the watch says it all and does it all. It doesn't need to spin. The oscillation, the chatter of the pallet, the stop-start-stop of the escapement wheel, again, that's where the compelling argument for this design is, and for a tourbillon in my opinion. This watch absolutely sells that appeal. It has all of that impact. When you turn it over, you can see the caliber 421, and this watch features the 2000s variant of the El Primero. In terms of decoration, it's not the agricultural, purely functional finish that you saw during the 90s and the 80s. This is a pretty comely movement. It's got brushing, radial and circular graining on wheels. It's got beveling on all the edges of the plates and the levers. The screw heads are polished, their slots are chamfered, they're chemically blued screws on the parts of the El Primero. that relate to adjustment of the watch. So that's Zenith's little cue to the watchmaker, and it's also attractive because you get that interplay of rhodium-plated brass. You get the brass wheels, you get the blued screws, you get the pink and purple of the pivot jewels. There's a lot going on here, and it's a very technical-looking movement. It's not a boring kind of inert thing like a 7750. It's got a lot of life and personality to it. So considering how historic the El Primero is, the first integrated high-beat automatic chronograph movement dating back to 1969, every connoisseur knows the story. But considering how historic it is, you want to really be able to show it off in full, from the back and from the front, and this Chronomaster Open Power Reserve gives you that ability. Now there is a 52-hour power reserve, far more than the industry standard 42 hours, and you have a little power reserve gauge here at the base of the dial to show you that. Contrasting finishes, the hour track is actually brushed, beautifully silvered, with a clou de Paris guilloche around the center section of the dial. There's also a rose engine turned pattern within the subdial, which measures chronograph minutes at 3 o'clock. You start it up. The famed El Primero beats away with the smoothest sweep seconds hand of any chronograph you're likely to see. Because it beats 10 times per second instead of 8 like a conventional chronograph, it just has a slightly smoother sweep. Seamless, and from an arm's length, you can't even see the indentations of the individual stop-starts of the escapement. It's almost completely smooth. Again, from an arm's length, this could be a Psycho spring drive. Now, it's a beautifully designed dial. Even though it is silver on silver, it's a very visible dial because the hands themselves are beautifully black oxidized, so there's high contrast in spite of that silver dial look. A lot of silver dials, silver metal, silver hand watches blur into illegibility at arm's length or even at close examination. Not this one. Zenith thought ahead. They are a manufacturer par excellence, making everything from the case to the movement to their own hairsprings. They know how to make hands and a dial. So Zenith does a great job with this watch. The bottom line is that this is a fantastic piece that'll look great on any wrist. Anyone who has an appreciation for history and what the El Primero represents, saved from the scrapper's torch by an enterprising watchmaker in 1975, reborn as the heart of the Rolex Daytona in the 80s and 90s. This is a phoenix story, and it's one of the great kind of romantic tales of watchmaking. To have it in the iconic Chronomaster case with the epic and influential Open Escapement, I feel, rather than controversial, this is a landmark model. This is a watch that people will want from the Thierry Nataf era and from the 2000s. And when people look back on everything from Richard Mille to Audemars Piguet and the open dials, the open escapements, and the evolution of the movement as objet d'art, they will look back on the Chronomaster favorably and with a smile. Somewhere, Thierry Nataf, I hope you're smiling. And those out there who appreciate the El Primero and avant-garde art, check this out in high-res photographs on our website, watchyouwant.com. This Zenith Chronomaster Power Reserve. Open dial just might be the watch you want.